SpaceX, go for launch.
Max Q. Stage separation confirmed.
Landing burn.
Successful spacecraft separation.
Cygnus capture complete.
Welcome to ISS, Cygnus.
You're looking at a live view of Falcon 9 set to lift off from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida in just over 17 minutes from now. Today's mission marks SpaceX's 74th mission of 2024 and our 5th mission headed to the International Space Station so far this year, following Crew 8, CRS-30, NG-20, and AX-3. Thanks for tuning in to today's coverage of Northrop Grumman's 21st Commercial Resupply Services mission to the orbiting laboratory. I'm Zachary Lupin, an avionics reliability engineer here at SpaceX. Now, since 2012, SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket has supported operations on the International Space Station, delivering critical science, hardware, and supplies to crew aboard the space station with the use of our Dragon crew and cargo vehicles. As part of NASA's Commercial Resupply Services contract, SpaceX and Northrop Grumman offer safe, reliable, and cost-effective transportation both to and from the International Space Station.
Stage 2 lock slowed
In fact, Dragon and Cygnus are currently the only 2 operational U.S. cargo supply vehicles capable of supporting station activities, and Falcon 9 is the only U.S. launch vehicle in operation capable of delivering the spacecraft to low Earth orbit. And today's mission marks the 2nd time that SpaceX is launching a CRS mission on behalf of Northrop Grumman. Now, the teams here at SpaceX are proud to provide these services, which ultimately further our goal of one day making life multiplanetary. At T-minus 16 minutes and counting, the vehicle is currently tracking to an on-time liftoff. We are watching the weather this morning, which is currently 35% favorable for liftoff. Now, if we don't launch today, we have a backup opportunity this Tuesday, August 6th at 10:18 a.m. Eastern Time. Now, as you might imagine, the crew on board the space station is preparing for their upcoming delivery. And for more on those preparations, I'll turn it over to NASA's Courtney Beasley. Courtney?
Thank you, Zachary, and good morning to everyone from the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. It's a full house aboard the International Space Station with 9 crew members living and working at the orbital outpost. The Expedition 71 crew, who you see now, are being led by Station Commander Oleg Kononenko. But the focus of attention today on the Falcon 9 launch of the SS Francis R. Dick Scobie Cygnus cargo craft, named after the late commander of the Challenger STS-51L mission. Scobie served as pilot aboard Challenger on STS-41C in April of 1984, which retrieved, repaired, and redeployed the Solar Max science satellite. He was then the commander of the ill-fated Challenger STS-51L mission in 1986. Northrop Grumman's resupply vehicle is poised to deliver roughly 4 tons of science, experiments, and equipment to the orbital outpost. After Cygnus separates from the upper stage of Falcon 9 today, the spacecraft will conduct a series of engine firings to increase its altitude to match that of the International Space Station. That will set it up for the start of joint operations between Northrop Grumman engineers in Dulles, Virginia, and the NASA Flight Control team here in Houston. A launch today will bring Cygnus to the station in the morning hours Tuesday, where NASA astronauts Matt Dominic and Jeanette Epps will be waiting in the cupola, set to use the station's robotic arm to reach out and grapple the spacecraft. That will be installed to the Earth-facing berthing mechanism on the Unity module for a stay of about 5.5 months. But we're counting down to launch as you are, Zachary, so back to you in Hawthorne.
Thanks, Courtney. Falcon 9 is a reusable 2-stage rocket designed and manufactured by SpaceX for the reliable and safe transport of people and payloads in Earth orbit and beyond. Now, this year we've launched 73 missions to date, which is on average 1 launch every 3 days. And we're looking to launch up to 148 missions in 2024. And reusability is what makes all of that possible. So with that, let's meet Falcon 9, the first and currently the only orbital class rocket capable of reflight. Starting at the top of the vehicle is the payload fairing, which is a protective shell that encases the payload being sent to space, which today is Cygnus. Made of a carbon composite material and having a 17-foot diameter, the space within the payload fairing is able to comfortably contain your average-sized fire truck. Now, that fairing made up of 2 halves will separate and jettison away from the vehicle, exposing the payload once Falcon 9 reaches space. Now, Cygnus rolled out to the pad on Friday morning after wrapping up the process known as encapsulation earlier this week. This payload fairing was specially customized to accommodate late load operations on the pad, and we'll talk a bit more about those modifications later on in the program. Continuing on down the vehicle, we have the second stage. The second stage is powered by a single Merlin vacuum engine, or MVAC, which is optimized to perform in the vacuum of space. After stage separation, the MVAC will ignite and carry the payload to its final orbit. Now, the Falcon 9's first and second stages are connected via a black inner stage, which houses the MVAC engine and the system that decouples the two stages during stage separation. And below that is the first stage, which is powered by 9 Merlin engines. These 9 Merlin engines provide the initial thrust to lift Falcon 9 off of the ground through the lower, thicker part of the atmosphere. Each of these Merlin 1D engines delivers about 190,000 pounds of thrust at sea level, which gives Falcon 9 a combined 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Now, after stage separation, Stage 1, also called the booster, will return to Earth for recovery and reuse on a future mission. For today's mission, we'll be attempting to land this booster at Landing Zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. And this mission will mark this booster's 10th launch and landing, having previously flown AX-2, Euclid, AX-3, CRS-30, SES Astra 1P, and 4 Starlink missions. Now, weather continues to be a watch for today's launch from Space Launch Complex 40, and we'll continue providing you updates as the clock ticks closer to T0. For now, let's learn a bit more about the spacecraft delivering roughly 8,200 pounds of science and supplies to the International Space Station. Now, in order to support Cygnus missions, SpaceX designed a custom fairing and payload transfer truck with a mobile clean room to support late load operations, which happen while the rocket is horizontal and on the pad deck. Late load refers to loading cargo in the final hours before launch and after the spacecraft has already been encapsulated within the payload fairing. Now, with 8 minutes and 24 seconds to go, we can go for launch, and we'll continue to provide updates on the weather as we get closer to T0. For now, let's head back to Courtney for a closer look at the science on today's mission.
Yeah, Zachary, we are at the T-minus 8 minutes and counting to the launch of the Falcon 9 rocket and the Northrop Grumman Cygnus cargo craft, which is delivering roughly 4 tons of supplies and science experiments to the International Space Station. Now, science is the prime focus for crews living and working on the station, and today's delivery run aims to observe the development of blood vessels and engineered liver tissue, evaluate liquid and gas flow through porous media, demonstrate the production of many bloodstream and immune stem cells, and much more. Let's take a quick look at the science aboard Cygnus.
Northrop Grumman is set to launch its 21st commercial resupply services mission to the International Space Station, carrying science to further NASA's missions to deep space and benefit life on Earth. A packed bed reactor will test how microgravity affects the simultaneous movement of gases and liquids. Results will aid the design of various space systems, including life support systems. Researchers will continue testing a technology to produce stem cells in space, aiming to improve outcomes for patients with certain blood diseases, autoimmune disorders, and cancers. Microscopic organisms will travel to station to provide crucial insights into how spaceflight affects the ability of damaged DNA to repair itself. Demonstrations are educational videos demonstrating STEM topics in space for students on Earth. For this mission, astronauts will use a balloon, a penny, and a hex nut to examine centripetal force. Discover more about all of the science making the journey to the orbiting lab at nasa.gov/ISS-science.
It's T-minus 6 minutes and 20 seconds, and the SpaceX team is currently working no significant issues. Now, at T-minus 38 minutes, the team concluded their go, no-go poll and gave the okay to proceed into propellant load and launch.
Stage 1 RP1 load is complete.
And good call out there for Stage 1 RP1 loading completion. Now, at this point, that RP1 loading is complete on the Falcon 9 second stage and nearly complete on the first stage. The pre-valves between the first stage engines and the propellant tanks are open, and at the T-minus 7 minute mark, engine chill began. Liquid oxygen loading is underway on both stages and will complete at the T-minus 2 minutes to launch. We're also currently loading helium gas into both stages.
Now, to make sure engine startup goes well, SpaceX performed what is called engine chill, where a small amount of the super chilled liquid oxygen flowed into the Merlin engine's turbo pumps, and this was done to avoid a thermal shock to the propulsion system when the full flow of super chilled liquid oxygen is introduced into the Falcon 9 plumbing. Cygnus is also undergoing final vehicle health checks at this moment as it prepares to go on internal battery power, all monitored by Northrop Grumman flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia.
Coming up shortly, the transporter erector, or TE, will retract away from the Falcon vehicle. The TE is the large truss structure you see there next to the rocket.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressing for strong back retract.
And good call out there. First, we'll see the clamps open around the second stage, and then the TE will pull away from the rocket by a few degrees. At T0, ground hydraulic systems will pull the TE from about 2 degrees to 45 degrees away from Falcon 9 as it lifts off to provide clearance for the vehicle. We should see those clamp arms opening around the second stage in just about 20 seconds from now.
Strong back lower has started.
And good call out there. Falcon 9's fuel consists of both a propellant and an oxidizer. For our Falcon vehicles, we use a refined kerosene called Rocket Propellant 1, or RP1, and liquid oxygen, or LOX. And there you can see those clamp arms opening around the Falcon 9 second stage. We'll then start to see the strong back recline away from the vehicle. And there you can see that strong back moving away from the Falcon rocket. Now, you may have noticed the white clouds building around the Falcon vehicle. Those white clouds are the chilled gas above the LOX tank that we vent overboard to maintain pressure in the tank as needed. And when that vented oxygen comes out into the warm Florida air, it condenses into clouds. Now, as I mentioned earlier today, The booster supporting today's mission is flying for its 10th time, and a key indicator of this flight history is the soot that you might just be able to make out on the skin of the vehicle there. This soot comes from the carbon-based fuel of the rocket that gets deposited onto the body of the vehicle during re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
And good call out there that Stage 1 LOX loading is now complete on the Falcon 9 first stage.
Now checkouts of the second stage thrust vector control actuators are underway. This is referred to as an engine gimbal or wiggle test. This is when SpaceX moves the nozzles ever so slightly to make sure that the guidance hardware is acceptable for flight. SpaceX does the same checkouts on the first stage engines, and that happens just seconds before ignition.
Now we should be hearing a call out.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
And there's that call out right there for Stage 2 LOX loading completion. Now Cygnus is also performing its final health checks to make sure that all of its primary systems are ready for its rendezvous with the International Space Station. And as I mentioned earlier, those white clouds you see around the vehicle are complete.
Gas launch closeouts has started.
Good call out there. Those white clouds are completely normal and are just the chilled gas above the LOX tank that we vent overboard to maintain pressure in the tank as needed. Now coming up in about 15 seconds from now, we should hear the call out that Falcon 9 will be in startup, which will mean that the rocket's launch computers will have taken over the count.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And there's the call. Falcon 9 is now in startup. Cygnus is transitioning to internal power, and the Falcon 9 computers are in final pre-launch checks, instructing the rocket through the final seconds before liftoff. Both stages are now being pressurized for launch, and the range remains go for launch.
T-minus 30 seconds. Seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition, engines full power, and liftoff of Falcon 9. Go SpaceX, go Cygnus, NG-21.
Falcon 9 and Cygnus take flight. The SS Dick Scobie is en route to the International Space Station.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
As you saw, successful liftoff from Space Launch Complex 40.
Power and telemetry nominal.
Good call out there. Coming up in just about 20 seconds from now, we should hear a call out for max Q. The vehicle passes through max Q, or the point of maximum aerodynamic pressure, when the increasing speed of Falcon and the decreasing air density combine to create...
Falcon 9 is supersonic.
Combine to create maximum aerodynamic pressure. And good call out there.
Max Q.
And there's that call out for max Q. Coming up next are 5 events which will happen in rapid succession: main engine cutoff, stage separation, second engine start, boost back burn start, and then fairing separation. Main engine cutoff, or MECO, is where all 9...
Chill started.
Good call out there. MECO is where all 9 M1D engines on the Falcon 9 first stage shut down. This is followed by stage separation or the separation of the first and second stages of Falcon. A few seconds later, the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage will ignite to boost Cygnus to low Earth orbit, and this is called out as Second Engine Start 1 or SES-1. After that, Falcon 9's first stage will...
Vehicle is following a nominal trajectory.
After that, Falcon 9's first stage will ignite again to orient itself to head back to land. And shortly thereafter, the two fairing halves will separate and expose the spacecraft to the vacuum of space. We should be hearing the first of those callouts happening in just a few moments from now.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
Stage 1 boost back startup.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And there we heard the callouts for all 5 of those events, which again were MECO, followed by stage separation, then SES-1, boost back burn start, and fairing separation. Now coming up shortly, we should hear a callout for completion of the boost back burn on the Falcon 9 first stage. This burn, which will last in total about 50 seconds, is the first of 3 burns the booster needs to go through to make its way back to landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida.
Boost back shutdown.
And there's that call out for boost back shutdown on the Falcon 9 first stage. Now, if you're just joining us, you're watching a live
Both vehicles are following nominal trajectories.
Good call out there. If you're just joining us, you're watching a live webcast for NG-21, Northrop Grumman's 21st commercial resupply services mission to the International Space Station. This is SpaceX's 74th mission for 2024 and the 5th flight to the orbiting laboratory this year. Now, in order to make its way back to land today, the Falcon 9 first stage has 2 more burns to execute. Next up is the entry burn, where 3 of the Merlin engines will reignite. This helps to slow the stage down as it re-enters the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere. And following the entry burn, the booster will go through its landing burn. And this is a single engine burn that brings the vehicle speed down rapidly in order to land back on Earth. We should be hearing the call out for that entry burn in just about 2 minutes from now. Now, during the entry burn, Falcon 9 is decelerating by firing its Merlin engines, but the rocket is still moving really fast, and this causes the vehicle to fly through Merlin's exhaust gases, or plume, which deposit a layer of soot onto the vehicle surface. And that soot comes from the carbon-based fuel that Falcon 9 uses, and with each flight, the soot builds up a little more on the outside of the vehicle. Now, as a reminder, on the left-hand side of your screen is the Falcon 9 first stage as it makes its way back to Earth, and on the right side is the MVAC engine on the second stage currently carrying Cygnus to orbit. The Merlins on the first stage are optimized for sea level, and these achieve 190,000 pounds of thrust each during ascent and descent. Now, the MVAC engine, with a much wider nozzle, is optimized to 220,500 pounds of thrust in vacuum. You may have also noticed on the left-hand side of your screen, Falcon 9 is equipped with 4 hypersonic grid fins, which are positioned near the top of the first stage. And stage 1 is using nothing but grid fins for steering as it returns to Earth. They orient the rocket during re-entry and guide it during its descent back to Earth. Beautiful views of the MVAC engine currently carrying the Cygnus spacecraft to orbit. Now, with the booster on the left-hand side of your screen, you may occasionally see little white puffs, and those are nitrogen gas bursts, which are used for attitude control. We should be hearing that call out for the entry burn of the Falcon 9 first stage in just about 10 seconds from now.
Both vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
Good call out there. Now, that entry burn will be for the first stage, which is on the left-hand side of your screen.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
And good call out there for entry burn startup on the Falcon 9 first stage.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
And there's that call
Stage 1 FTS has safed.
And there's that call out for entry burn shutdown on the Falcon 9 first stage. Now, the first stage is also equipped with 4 landing legs made of state-of-the-art carbon fiber with aluminum honeycomb. Placed symmetrically around the base of the rocket, they deploy just prior to landing. If successful, this will be the 10th time that we've recovered this particular booster and the 335th time that we've recovered
Both vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
335th time that we've recovered a first stage booster since our first successful landing in 2015. And we did have a good call out there for vehicles following nominal
Stage 1
trajectories.
transonic.
Amazing view of the Falcon 9 booster as it makes its way back to landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida.
Stage 1 landing burn. Landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
A spectacular touchdown of our Falcon 9 booster at landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Now again, this booster just completed its 10th flight and the 335th successful
Stage 2
landing.
has entered terminal guidance.
335th successful landing.
Stage 2 FTS has safed.
For an orbital class rocket, including both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy missions, and good callouts there on the nets. Now coming up at around the 8.5-minute mark, we should hear a call out for second engine cutoff 1 or SECO 1, which is when the MVAC engine on the second stage shuts down. And that'll conclude the roughly 6-minute burn by this engine needed to get Cygnus into the proper orbit for eventually intercepting the International Space Station. We should hear that call out in just a couple moments.
MVAC shutdown.
And there's that call out for the MVAC shutdown on the Falcon 9 second stage. We're now waiting for confirmation of good orbit.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And there's that call out for nominal orbital insertion. At T plus 9 minutes into the mission, and the second stage has one last major task, commanding separation of the Cygnus spacecraft just a few minutes from now. Now, for those of you just tuning in, you're watching a live webcast for NG-21, Northrop Grumman's 21st commercial resupply services mission to the International Space Station. This is SpaceX's 74th mission for 2024 and the 5th flight to the International Space Station this year. And for those of you following along, you'll know that Cygnus will be joining the Crew 8 SpaceX Dragon spacecraft, which docked with the space station earlier this year in March. Now, both Northrop Grumman and SpaceX have a long history of supporting the International Space Station with cargo missions like today's. SpaceX's first commercial resupply services, or CRS mission, CRS-1, launched in 2012 and made history by restoring America's capability to deliver and return cargo to the station. The Cygnus spacecraft has been visiting the ISS since 2013, and the first Cygnus CRS mission, Orb-1, launched in 2014. Cygnus has since then delivered more than 138,000 pounds of equipment, science experiments, and supplies to sustain the ISS astronauts under NASA's commercial resupply services contracts. Now, the most recent cargo resupply mission was SpaceX's CRS-30 mission on March 21st, 2024, delivering 6,262 pounds of scientific research, crew supplies, and hardware to the orbiting laboratory. Dragon later returned to Earth with 3,961 pounds of cargo. The CRS partnership has helped build a strong American commercial space industry that will soon take us to destinations beyond low Earth orbit. In fact, these missions are providing critical learnings that will help us develop a human presence on the Moon and Mars, which will require a steady supply of cargo missions to grow and thrive. Now, Cygnus refers to the constellation that is visible in the northern night sky. It's Northrop Grumman's tradition to name each Cygnus spacecraft in honor of an individual who has made substantial contributions to human spaceflight. Northrop Grumman named the NG-21 Cygnus spacecraft in remembrance and celebration of the life of Francis R. Dick Scobie, a United States Air Force pilot and NASA astronaut, best known as the commander of the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger mission, STS-51L. Now, shortly after launch, the vehicle experienced a fatal disaster, and he lost his life along with 6 other crew members. Scobie was an astronaut, pilot, and engineer who commanded the 1986 Challenger mission. In 1966, he obtained his U.S. Air Force pilot wings, and shortly after, served a tour of duty in Vietnam. When he returned, he was selected to attend the U.S. Air Force Aerospace Research Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base in California. And over the next several years, he served as a test pilot, logging more than 6,500 hours of flying time in 45 different types of aircraft. In 1978, Scobie was selected into NASA's astronaut candidate class, completing training in August of 1979. Now, in addition to his astronaut role, Scobie was an instructor pilot on the NASA Boeing 747 shuttle carrier airplane. In 1984, he was selected to fly as pilot of the STS-41C mission, during which Scobie logged 168 hours in space. And then in 1986, served as commander of the Challenger spacecraft. Scobie was posthumously awarded the Congressional Space Medal of Honor in 2004 by President George W. Bush for meritorious and dedicated service to the nation and his pioneering contributions to human spaceflight. Commander Scobie is memorialized all over the country, including at an exhibit at the National Medal of Honor Heritage Center and at Arlington National Cemetery, where the 7 Challenger crew members are honored for their incredible courage. We're currently at T plus 13 minutes and 12 seconds and counting, and we're expecting to hear the call out for payload deploy at around the T plus 14 minute and 36 second mark. As a reminder, this is SpaceX's 5th mission headed to the International Space Station so far this year, following Crew 8, CRS-30, NG-20, and AX-3. Following separation, Cygnus will have a nearly 40-hour transit to the space station, where the station's Canadarm2 will grapple Cygnus and the spacecraft will attach to the Unity module's Earth-facing port for cargo unloading by the Expedition 71 crew. We should be hearing that call out for payload deployment in just about 25 seconds from now. Should be hearing that call out any moment for payload deployment of the Cygnus spacecraft.
Cygnus deploy confirmed.
And there you have it, a successful spacecraft separation. The Cygnus spacecraft is now on its way to the International Space Station, and as mentioned, is expected to arrive about 40 hours from now. And with successful separation, that's going to do it for me here in Hawthorne. Be sure to check spacex.com/launches for a schedule of our upcoming missions. In the meantime, Courtney, what's next for Cygnus?
Thanks, Zachary, and welcome back into the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center. Next up will be the deployment of Cygnus's solar arrays, scheduled to begin at about 2.5 hours after launch, and it should take about 48 minutes to be completed. Once those arrays are deployed, we will provide an update on the station blog with the latest news. But joining me now on the phone is Bill Spetch, the Operations Integration Manager for the International Space Station program. Bill, thanks for joining us, and how significant was today's launch as partners collaborated to send Cygnus on its way to the station?
I will tell you, today's launch is very significant, as all of our missions to the ISS are. Each mission delivers critical resupply items to the vehicle, food, water, critical spares, but most significantly, it delivers the hardware and samples to conduct the groundbreaking science that is only possible on the ISS. It is amazing as I reflect back on the previous 20 Cygnus vehicle launches to see just how much capability has been added to the vehicle to support the ISS mission. I had the privilege to be at the first commercial resupply services launch for Cygnus to ISS, and it is awesome seeing where we are today with this launch. I'm really excited that the weather cooperated with us to get this mission underway.
Bill, we're glad the weather cooperated too. If you would please outline for us the upcoming activities for the crew on board the station as they prepare for Cygnus's arrival early Tuesday.
So we get most of the items in place and checked out before we launch as part of our launch commit criteria. The crew has already done some practice runs on board for grappling Cygnus when it arrives. Closer to the arrival, they will set up to monitor its approach to the capture point before ultimately grappling the spacecraft with the robotic arm.
And Bill, anytime a visiting vehicle arrives at the station, there's a choreography to unload the spacecraft. How complex is that process, and what factors contribute to it?
It does take a lot of planning and choreography to unload Cygnus. The team on the ground looks at a number of factors when addressing how the vehicle will be unloaded. First and foremost is we want to get going on all the time-critical science experiments that arrive on the vehicle. Those will be uploaded first to allow the crew to start conducting those experiments. The team must also take into account the available storage on board the ISS. This mission is delivering over 8,000 pounds of science, supplies, and hardware that takes up a lot of space. The team will stage what is retrieved from Cygnus in order to balance that with the available space inside the ISS. And finally, some of the hardware arriving will be installed on the ISS at planned times later during the mission. The teams account for all of these factors when planning how and when to unload the spacecraft.
All right, Bill Spetch, the Operations Integration Manager for the International Space Station Program. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And with that, we will wrap up our launch coverage of Northrop Grumman's 21st Commercial Resupply Services mission. Cygnus is now on course to be captured at about 2:10 a.m. Central Time, 3:10 a.m. Eastern Time, Tuesday morning. Live coverage of rendezvous and capture will begin at 12:30 a.m. Central Time, 1:30 a.m. Eastern Time, followed by coverage of Cygnus's installation to the station at 3:30 a.m. Central Time and 4:30 a.m. Eastern. In the meantime, you can learn even more about the mission on the web at nasa.gov/commercial resupply. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you back here on Tuesday morning.